Well, here we are again. Domain City, Domainville.
Yes, we are. We're working our way, and we only have two left, don't we?
Yeah, I think today we're doing measurement, and next week will be uncertainty.
Yes, yes.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to next week, but I really was fascinated by measurement.
Well, let
Um,
me guess. Let me guess. You're the scientific theoretical university professor, so I'm sure you have a story about measurement.
well, yeah, it was okay. So let me go way back before project management. Okay.
Yeah.
I was introduced to computational analysis back in like 1973, 74, and 79, right? I hung out at the university. My parents both worked. My dad was a professor in political science. Now, a couple high school kids, I was only like 13 or 14 at the time, a couple high school kids said, "Come here, Tim." And they showed me basically, number one, how to load a program into a computer, and number two, how to use it to play a game. And they only had teletype. You only had a single line of input or output. Input, then output, then input, then output. But they were playing very elaborate games, right? It was really wild. Well, when I started going to university, I was introduced to the HP Hewlett Packard series of computers. Remember the programmable computers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can write a function, not just a calculation. You can build a function and store it and play it. And it was like magic. And I was learning geometry and trigonometry. And by using two inputs, I could create a unique output. And it was like I was I was reading the future. Okay. This was the dawn of analysis for me. So when I got into projects and project management, I told myself, I got to get numbers. And so I drove my teams crazy. I drove my supervisor crazy, my sponsor crazy, but I was able to do some magical things. And then when I went to business school, especially my MBA, they taught me all these tools and skills to be able to pull this set of data and manipulating in this way, you can create not just a forecast, but a probability and a range. It's pretty predictable. And so I thought, like I said, I thought I had found magic. It was wonderful. How about you when you first were introduced to true data analysis on projects?
I tell you, when I first, as a young budding project manager, actually resented it. And this is weird because in fact, I remember these words, and I'm surprised I wasn't fired. My project manager, my boss, he was a vice president, asked me where my status report was and the numbers. He was always looking for the numbers. And I looked at him and I said, "You've got me so busy doing project status reports, I don't have time to work on the project," which which was the wrong thing to say, but you could tell I was frustrated. So when I first understood it, I thought it was a laborious add-on to torment me as a project manager. I didn't understand it at first, the value.
And you know what? It's really interesting. I had about the same, I did have a bit of what you had. It had to take me a few months to figure out my job was not getting the work done. My job is collecting data, analyzing it, understanding what the data was telling me, potential risks, potential opportunities, and also issues, and being able to use it for things like prioritization and root cause analysis. Um, and that's when I saw the real power
See, and
of being
that's
able to convert data.
and that's the key right there, what you said. I think my resentment came from the fact that they wanted me to collect this data, which I did every week dutifully. Sometimes I was late, but I collected it. It took a lot of my time, but then it was passed up and I didn't know what happened to it. I think had my vice president just spent those few minutes explaining the why, and we've talked about this before in terms of communication with our teams, If all I'd have understood was why, I would have probably also done my job as a data gatherer better in order to pass that on to him.
That's my advice. Boy, if anybody's listening to this, please heed Merv's voice. This is wisdom, okay? You don't just ask something, you don't just tell something to do. There has to be a purpose, or people will feel that their work is meaningless. This is such an important fact.
But I'll tell you what I did really understand when project analytics were something that we could be proud of as a team was a couple of my probably later projects. They were very, very large projects in the several $100 million range. So you know you had to have data to be able to understand where you were at any given time because we were dealing with some serious dollars, some serious time that people were putting in. And so those project analytics became very, very valuable. And I found that we got very good at it. We ended up developing, besides our project management office, of which I was part of, we also developed a project control office. And we had 3 people in the control office. All they did all week long was run numbers. And those numbers helped us understand every single nuance of what was happening so that we could pivot at the drop of a hat if we needed to, make changes and continue on so that the project would not suffer.
It's not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. It's not just creating spreadsheets. It's generating information reports that are usable and help you make better decisions.
Well, and what was also interesting was we had several bodies who were oversight, besides us doing project management oversight as part of the PMO. We had a federal body, the funding body that was oversight. We had the legislative body that was, from a legislature perspective, was oversight. And then we had this particular state's statewide IT shop needed its numbers. And so we got to the point where we collected once and disseminated many times to all of those bodies exactly the data they needed. And so we got very good at using data collection, but then presenting exactly what was required. And sometimes one body, we didn't want them to see what the other body was seeing. Not because we're trying to hide anything, but because sometimes it just invited too many questions and got in our way.
Wow. Yeah, and this is the problem. That governance is a necessary component in projects. You have to have that, like you said, oversight, compliance, and governance. You have to have it. But at the same time, it can often become so heavy and heavy lifting. I face this in construction where we had occupational safety and health, and then we had construction standards based on laws and regulations, and then policies. And you had to have 3 to 5 inspections, and you had to have a very, very formal process of here's a code violation. We know you haven't finished building it, but we want to flag it so that you're aware of it and you do it correctly before you go into inspection. And you're right, it almost feels like the data collected is getting in the way of the work, but at the same time, I like you said, I think it's sometimes necessary.
Well, not only that is, but we as project manager, we are very creative and we understand what it takes. So we put processes in. I'm sure you've witnessed this as well, where you put those processes in so that the data collection becomes almost rote, almost like muscle memory, and it starts to pop up as part of your process so that you're not doing any extra work. And so we worked on a lot of um, ideas like that so that we could develop and analyze those numbers very quickly.
That you bring up something here. Building your processes so they don't get in the way of the work. You said muscle memory and doing it by rote.
Yeah.
Does there any time or any effort that sticks out to you where you did it really well so you can explain people what it feels like to do this?
I could think of a couple. One is, for example, everyone's interested in whether you're meeting all of the requirements, right? That's one of the number one things. And so from that, when we developed our requirements, at the same time, we were able to develop the requirements traceability matrix and the analysis that went along with that. So that as we built our requirements, all of that just fell into place. So we didn't have to sit there and do any after the fact analysis because we put the processes in early so that all of that fell into place up front.
That triggers something with me too. Mapping the requirements to the work breakdown structures.
True.
So as you complete the work breakdown structure, work packages, you can sign off on the requirements, or you can see the gaps from completing that scope. But you're right. This traceability of requirements is really powerful, and it's a great communication device, right? Sometimes that's all the executives want to see, a punch down list of requirements and ones that are left, to give them not necessarily a schedule, not necessarily a budget, but also how much work is left and what's missing in the deliverable. This is easy, and it's very valuable.
Well, and it also fed other processes that were further down the line. Like when we did our system testing or user acceptance testing, we had to make sure that every requirement was met. So how do you gather that? You look to the requirements traceability matrix and you look to all of the numbers that come as a result of working through that matrix.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, you talk about metrics. Let's dig into this a little more in detail, okay? A lot of the metrics, while we're in execution, are talked about as key performance indicators. Now, these are metrics set up that determine alignment with objectives as well as progress, status, and fortis. And that's basically what the formal definition is. Now, these align with the requirements. So the indicators have something to do with requirements. How do you determine these are the numbers and the data we're going to collect on a project? Is it just requirements?
Is it just requirements? Requirements clearly were part of the base, the measurable basis of where we performing, where we in fact delivering as contracted. But I think that those metrics probably spider webbed into many other metrics. And I can think of one, for example, towards the end of the project when you're doing a full scale user acceptance test on the entire process. Then again, now you're looking at defects and you're looking at requirements satisfied by test cases, and you're looking at whether or not test cases prove the requirements and how many defects you have and what the fix rate is and what the re-entry of defect rate is and all of that. So yeah, there are some key performance indicators that measure how effective you are, not just in terms of progress, but also how effective you are in terms of your ability to perform.
Boy, this triggers a memory for me. I was sitting down with a company that was making a lot of chemicals for other industries, right? And they were about 140 years old. And I had built a CIO, an incredible database that was talking about the compression of about 350 data centers into 175 mega data centers, right? And I was asked to do the financial analysis. Yeah, it was like 72 tabs of data. It was insane. But it gave them the numbers. And at the end of the detail, the CIO said, Tim, these are great numbers. And this is giving me exactly what I want to see. This project is approved. And then he said, now, how are you going to go through the project and measure that return on investment? And how are you going to demonstrate it as part of the project? Because I want you to hand over not just the deliverable, but the functionality.
Yeah.
That's when I started understanding key performance indicators.
Well, and we just talked a little earlier about outcomes, right? So Everything was pushing
Exactly.
towards the outcome that that CEO or that CIO was expecting.
Exactly. It wasn't just a functionality. It wasn't just a thing or a service. He wanted value. He wanted a result, an outcome. And that opened my mind up to see. I'm not just talking about requirements. This is a whole different game in projects.
But and here's what's important for project managers who are listening to us. When it comes to what you just recounted in that example, there is no textbook that says this is how you develop these matrices of 72 Excel sheets. You did that because of necessity. And that's what we as project managers do because of necessity. I can give you all of the standard defect rates and defect, all of that stuff that comes out of UAT. But until you develop some analytical aspects of that that explain where the defects are coming from and where the soft spots in your development team are, until you can do those sorts of things with that data, you're really only scraping the surface.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's going back to my original story. That's where the magic is. It's the ability, and you only get to it through practice, the ability to select enough data and the right data in such a manner that you can apply the appropriate analysis and get something that help you say, okay, this gives me a better direction.
I like that too. Appropriate analysis. We're not doing analysis for the sake of analysis and putting a bunch of grids full of numbers on a status report. We're doing analysis for the sake of keeping us on track and doing a better job for our customers.
And that's the beauty of the training that you go through. When you take formal project management training, they say, okay, here's analysis, here's 19 different ways.
Yeah.
This is what it means. This is how to apply it. And here's some exercises to play with it and see what it feels like root cause analysis and prioritization and multi-criteria analysis and brainstorming. And it's wonderful. I wish we had more time to set aside and really do some deep dives into these tools that we all take for granted, but seeing them with fresh eyes, like I said, it just reignites the magic.
Yeah. I remember one project going back to the example of user acceptance testing and defect rates and volume of tests completed every week, where the vendor's project manager came and complained that we weren't testing fast enough. I was able to use the exact same data that he had pulled from the statistics and showed him that the errors coming from development were such that we could not test fast enough.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So it's interesting how the numbers, you just the applicable appropriate analysis is what's important.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So if this is so important from a project manager's perspective, do you allow delegation of all this to your team, or do you like to keep
Oh,
your hands on it yourself?
here's the problem. I enjoy it too much. I have to get my hands off of it sometimes because I can be overwhelmed with my curiosity and joy. I'll play chess till 3 in the morning. I'll play cribbage till 3 in the morning. I'll play data till 3 in the morning because I enjoy it and that's the way my mind works. Personally, when a project gets big enough, I really think that it should be considered its own unique skill, and I should bring in an expert who can do it better than me.
Yeah, and that's what I found too. A lot of the projects that I worked on, we had project control people specifically. All they did was crunch the numbers that we help them understand that they had to gather, but then also then the analysis was not delegated. The analysis came back to me and my team, and we would look at the results of the numbers that were crunched by our project control people and decide what tweaks we had to do to our process in order to keep the schedule going and the project on track.
So, this is a follow on question. It's almost more interesting to me. If we do delegate, what do we keep in this measurement as project managers, either through necessity or just because it's part of what we really do.
Yeah, a lot of what I personally keep is the analysis, and it depends on what the numbers are. Sometimes I just leave that to the team leads to do. But what I never delegate is the decision making of what the next steps are based on what the data told us. The next steps, that still comes down to the project manager and his or her leads, and perhaps his or her management to determine what the next step is based on what the data is saying.
Yeah, it's the application of the results of the analysis,
Correct.
and it's the interpretation of the analysis. That's the big thing. And we can think of it in two ways: ensuring that good decisions are made out of that good analysis, and number two, some way of validating and verifying that we're doing the analysis correctly. This is a really important skill.
Well, not only that is making sure that it is in fact being collected correctly.
Yeah. There's again, there's a whole class of activities and tools and knowledge in statistics that help you do that if you study it. We're talking about variance and the analysis of variance and all these things that a lot of people don't get involved in because statistics, it has a lukewarm approval from people. They think, number one, it's easy to manipulate. Number two, it's a archaic skill. But again, it's incredibly powerful when used in the right way.
Yeah, and what's interesting, when I got my undergraduate degree in computer science, this goes back several years, but we had 3 years of statistics in those 4 years of the undergraduate program. Those 3 years of statistics were textbooks written by computer professionals specifically for computer science degrees. It was not generic statistics. It was a computer science related statistics. So I hear you. Statistics and their understanding it's an important discipline for project managers.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, just the questions that you were looking at. Are we collecting the right data? Are we collecting enough data? Is there enough of a difference or a variance for it to be meaningful and for us to take action? Those are the things that we should be thinking about as project managers, especially as we delegate the data collection and turning it into information.
I was just smiling as you were saying that because I remember on a project where things were going so well, I decided to look into the analysis and the collection and analysis of data because it was going that well. Either we were ahead of schedule or there was something wrong in the data collection and analysis.
Yeah.
So indeed, there was something wrong in the data collection and analysis, and it's amazing how and many project managers would have just taken that and said, "Wow, we are beating the schedule. We're doing great."
I had this issue too. And it was funny because I was getting a report from the invoices coming in. And I was saying, we're getting all this work done and we're only spending this much money. And I was able to, through data, said, oh, here's a test center over here, and they haven't been providing enough invoices. And they came back to me and they had found 3 invoices that fell behind a desk. See, this is the thing. It's funny because number one, it's human error and anybody can have that happen, but you can use data to trace back and say, bingo, let's look over here. Maybe not under this desk, but at least at this test center.
Absolutely. So you seem to me like a person who would like their dashboards.
Oh boy, do I. In fact, I like them so much that I don't have a real standard way of doing it, but I do have a nice look and feel, and they collect the same one. This is where we start talking about everybody is a car collector, or everybody works on cars, and what modifications do you like to do to your engine? That's what I envision when I see project managers getting together and comparing dashboards.
So are you a pie chart person, a bar chart person, burn down person, or does it matter?
Well, when it comes to reporting, I'm a combination. I like burn down charts because there's a satisfaction when you're working on you're cutting wood and all of a sudden the uncut wood is smaller than the cut wood. There's a real there's a gratuitous emotion that you feel from that, right? Same thing with projects and getting the work done. All of a sudden the amount of work complete is bigger than the work that you haven't started on, right? Second of all, I like control charts. I am a beast for control charts because number one, it says, here's a defect, here's a defect, here's a defect. And number two, it says, we don't have any defects, but there's something causing this process to misbehave. It gives us not just an indicator of we have a failure, but we have an indicator of instability, which could possibly lead to failure.
Interesting. So it's almost like you measure your own data by putting in some of your own controls.
Exactly. There was a guy by the name of Herbert Schubert. Those of you who have taken any education in project management would know Schubert, right? You know him primarily because of the Schubert Deming product life cycle, right? Plan, do, check, act. Well, he did something else that's really interesting. He said, if you use this new science tool called statistics, we can set control limits and we can set failure limits where we can see deviations from process. And by doing this, Short said he was able to identify root causes of noise in the system through the data where the problem was coming from, root cause analysis. And that was the advent of developing quality tools.
Yeah, that just makes a lot of sense. I know some of our favorites on the projects that I've worked on. Well, everybody wants to understand progress against where you should be, right?
Mhm.
So my actual progress against my planned progress. That's the number one, the most basic thing there is. So we've built dashboards around that. But what I found was interesting is as we began to approach implementation, and I think this is works well for either predictive or agile. But as you begin to get close to implementation and you're about to foist this huge system onto your client base, that you have to understand is everything in order for me to be able to lay it out for my end users. And this is more than just the development or to make sure every requirement is taken care of. This goes to the point of is everyone's personal computer upgraded to be able to take the new software? I mean, it goes down to just thinking of every single little thing that can happen during implementation. So suddenly we end up with a whole brand new set of dashboards that we're watching. And as we approach implementation date, that we're making sure that those burn downs and all of those things are taken care of as part of those dashboards. So again, the dashboards we use depending on where we are in the project and what it is that we need to measure at any significant time in the project.
Yeah, yeah. And for other things, not just data, not just the graphics, but
Right.
the information itself. I like in a dashboard not just to have a burn down and a progress status and a forecast. I like to have the top 3 to 5 issues and risks. I
Right.
like to be transparent in these things, especially give people a little bit of a heads up of what might happen, but I don't want to overwhelm them with the risk register or the issue log.
No, you don't want to overwhelm them, but you do want to keep everyone's, especially the stakeholders, everyone's mind and focus on what is upcoming and what is important at that moment in time.
Right,
I
right,
mean,
right, indeed.
And some of our dashboards even track the, shall I say, the negative. So we would say, hey, we've trained everyone except these 7 people. These 7 people are out sick. We need to make sure that we get those 7 people trained. So not only did we train the progress against goal, we also trained, we also measured what would happen if we weren't meeting goal.
Very good. Very good. Now, here's another common question. Are you an off-the-shelf analysis person like Microsoft Project or Primavera, or are you a build it and in-house development of the reporting and tools?
The tool, the Primavera, the Microsoft Office became our basis for the schedule and the and those progress. But no, we built our own, and sometimes we tweak them depending on what the client required of us. We also tweak them based on what was happening on that particular project. I emphasize this so much to my project teams and even to my customers, is that no two project teams are the same, no two projects are the same, no two customers are the same. And so you have to be able to develop your statistics and your metrics and your measurement data along the lines of what's required for that team, for that project, for that customer at that time.
Right. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it's not just the ability to manipulate the data in the database behind these major tools, but a lot of times I find myself creating a small database where I can populate an Excel spreadsheet based on a few scripts and then use Excel to generate the reports. I know it sounds awfully manual, but again, with muscle memory, this is something that's very easy.
But you know what I found is some of those things that when they're that important, even if they're manual, even if it sounds manual, the fact that I personally am hands-on means I am understanding that data to
That's the
the. If I let someone else develop something for me, maybe they missed something in the formula that I wasn't expecting. And by the way, I love Excel and pivot table are our friends. Pivot
yes, they
tables
are.
are so incredibly important to the analysis of what we do.
Yes, yes. I'm not somebody who's always looking at the internet for a bigger and better way to use Excel, but I really appreciate all the contributions to Microsoft and Google for making these tools so rich with functionality and ease of use.
Well, and I can tell you that many of the big developers, the for-profit developers in the US, Excel is one of their major tools that everyone from the project manager down to the developer uses intimately.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you
Let's
have a
go back. Let's go back to analysis where we're talking about it more generally too. Okay. Do you have a small set of rules that you cannot break when you're planning and implementing analysis and decision making and communication?
an absolute set of rules I can't break? Well, number one, when it comes to analysis, you're talking about analysis of the data itself.
Yeah, yeah, the treatment
Oh,
of the data.
yeah. Number one is always, always, always check my assumptions. Because without checking the assumptions, you could end up analyzing data that was, first of all, collected incorrectly. And secondly, the results of your analysis may be incorrect based on the fact that you've never checked a single assumption of how some of that data was produced.
Yeah, an assumption is a guess, and the analysis of the guess is still a guess. And by either standardizing that data or by extrapolating from that data, you're just adding potential for error.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, the nice thing about Excel is you can put in all of these checksums all over the place if you're doing those sorts of things. To me, if an analyst has given me a spreadsheet with their analysis and I don't see checksums, then I am suspicious that when they did their calculations, they may have missed a row. You never know. So it's, yeah, you always have to make those checksums work for you and check those assumptions.
There's a wonderful tool in statistics called the p-value. And those of you who've studied statistics understand that it's basically an easy way to say, is this data meaningful? And is the variance that we're looking at meaningful enough for us to deal with? It's not prioritization per se. It's looking at the analysis itself and saying, are we chasing a ghost in the data? Are we seeing this information in the way we should appreciate it, or we should approach it? And again, these things are treated very effectively, both as functions, and you can build these into the formulas rather easily.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you had asked the question if I had a set of rules. I think an analysis you also mentioned was a communication, and
Communication, yeah, that's that's the thing. We can't forget that a lot of this measurement is valueless. Like you said, it's totally valueless if we don't share it and we bring it to either decision makers or to anyone who needs to understand.
well, well, exactly. And in that communication, it's total transparency, good news and bad news. I mean, if I'm in a situation where suddenly the data is telling me that we're falling behind or we're in danger of falling behind, I want all hands on deck, including my boss, to help me understand how we can collectively get this back on track.
That's such an important fact. I could speak hours about this. You notice when we talk about even just change control and the analysis of the validation of applied changes, we're talking about it is a necessity to have everybody understand this. And when we're looking at just simple progress status and and forecasting, a lot of times we're a knee-jerk reaction of a human being is, I don't want to cause too many questions because it's going to take time. But that's what our job is.
It's
There are,
exactly what our job is. Not only be able to cause the questions, but if we don't have answers, then we know that we can get help to answer those questions. Because let's face it, as I told someone one time, you can't sit here and say, we're both in the same rowboat, but your end of the boat is sinking. We all we all need to be able to look at what's going on and help each other make sure that that project crosses the line at the appropriate time.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
You also mentioned decision making, and I think I have one rule about decision making: early and often.
I've advocated for a unique category of milestones that say, here's a governance point, here's a governance point, here's a governance point. And it's a barrier to entry. It is a formal gate until we get that decision.
Well, exactly. And then the other, actually, I have two rules about decision making. Once the decision is made, don't second guess yourself.
Right.
You got to keep going. It's, as someone said, you can't steer a parked car. Well, sometimes you don't know which way to go, but until you start moving and then steer, you're not going to understand if your decision was right or wrong or indifferent. So you can't sit there and analyze it to death and then not make a decision.
Yeah, the best thing you can do when you realize you're starting to get into a cycle of second guessing is to capture it and say, why am I second guessing? And then say to yourself or to others, that's right. This is a response that you're doing because you're using critical analysis and you're concerned about the result. Let's put that here. By moving forward after making that decision, we'll collect just enough data not to hurt the project, but to understand if the change is doing what it's supposed to do. That's all you need to do.
That's
It's constant course correction.
Yeah, because once you're moving, you can always change to go back the other direction as well, because the data tells you that. So, but if you're sitting there not making the decision, you can't ever get to that point.
And I really appreciate that that statement. I've used this in my class, by the way, Merv, and I attribute you to it. It's you cannot steer a parked car.
Right. So
Yeah.
earned value metrics, I know that's one of the measurements that we all, even those of us who have studied PMI guidance for some time, earned value metrics seems to be one of those things that everybody likes to put on any kind of project. And I can tell you that I, I'm not necessarily a fan. I know it's a necessity, but I just don't like it.
Okay, and that's fair, and
Yeah.
that's fair. Um, I used to be that way, and then I spent like about 2 weeks, and I said, "What is the meaning behind all these formulas? Not, not what's the result and how do I use the results for project success? Not that." I said, "What is the intention? How can I interpret this function like schedule variance? What's the difference between my plan and my actual cost variance? What's the difference between the money we spent and the work we got done?" Once I started connecting that, I found broad and very powerful application of these functions.
Yeah, and I think the reason I resented it is because I used to work for companies that used earned value as their revenue recognition tool largely. And of course, they expected a certain amount of revenue out of every project. And if you were short, then you heard about it from senior management. And maybe that was my resentment, not so much the metric as the
Yeah,
result of the metric.
it's not necessarily the tool and the problem with the tool. It may be the right tool for the wrong application.
Yeah. Or being used, yeah, being used in the wrong way or something. But yeah.
Exactly. So is there any part of earned value metrics that you find that you really like?
Well, the part that I think made a lot of sense to me, although it was hard, it was really hard to have, especially younger members who weren't used to it, younger members of my team work with it, is the whole idea of estimate to complete. And it was hard to explain to staff that every task they worked on at the end of the week when we took our cut, you have put in so many hours against the task. The number of hours left to complete that task was not just a subtraction of planned minus actual, but that there was an action. So if you think you can get it done 8 hours faster, then put that in. If you think it's going to take you 8 hours longer, put that in. But make sure that we understand the estimate to complete. Once we got the team firing on all cylinders and understanding what it meant to develop those estimates to complete, and we did simplify it a little bit, then I could, on a weekly basis, look you in the eye and tell you exactly where we were on that project and what our chances of meeting every milestone were.
That's powerful. Now, one of my favorites, and I'm not bragging here, but I just find it so interesting, is something called two complete performance index. Even the word, even the name of it begs confusion. But if you tease the details out of the formula, you're comparing how much work do we have remaining and how much budget do we have remaining, and are we going to run out of one or the other first? And having that TCPI, and when it's balanced, it's one, it's a ratio. And when you have too much work and not enough budget, or too much budget and not enough work, you can look at it as a trend. And it's a very elegant way of saying, do I have to get more gasoline before I get home? Can I pull into the garage with just barely an empty tank? And that's the objective of your projects. And again, I don't think we give these tools the respect, or we don't give ourselves enough time to understand how to use this properly.
Well, that's the big thing. And I'm not sure it's not that we don't give ourselves enough time. It's, do we in fact train our project managers well in those areas? We train them on process. Man, I know project managers that can do Gantt charts in their sleep. They can do project schedules in their sleep, but have them analyze the numbers specifically to understand, do I have more work than budget or more budget than work? I don't think they're trained well in those areas, a lot of them.
See, and this is the problem. We think when we're first as project managers, we're out there, we're the lone wolf. Our job is focused on project, project, project. And we're almost trained in a manner through the culture of how organizations and companies approach project managers, such that we don't come to each other and compare notes, or we don't use the PMO when it's all not all just all right, but it's an incredible benefit. And so we don't share these little nuggets, these nuances that can not just make the project more successful, but to make the the experience of managed projects really interesting and really novel.
You just made me think, in all of the times that I've written up, collected, and disseminated lessons learned, I'm not sure I captured what you just said in terms of the analysis part of that. Did I learn something from my analysis capture, my data capture, and my analysis of data? I don't ever recall putting that in lessons learned.
Wow. Wow. That's a statement.
Yeah.
Um, I I didn't do anything unique. All my see, this is the problem too. When we go from project to project to project, we don't look at our measurement and analysis and see if we can do a better job. We just do it. What would happen if we focused our lens of continuous improvement on measurement?
I think that would be I think that would be very useful for most projects, because how many times do I look back at a project and ask myself, it's at this point here that we started to veer off course? I don't know that I've ever done that. What could I have done back here to fix it so that I'm not having to recover at this point? And how will I take that lesson to my next project so that I don't veer off course at that point? Yeah, I think that could be a useful tool.
Yeah, it's a valuable investment, sure. So we're getting to that point at the end of our talk where we always ask, one of us asks, if you were to advise a project manager who's just getting started in the career, what would you tell them to focus when learning how to develop a set of common tools in measurement and analysis?
Well, first of all, I would say become very, very familiar with your own organization's performance tools, analytical tools, because those are the ones you're going to be living with. And so if you don't understand your own organization's tools, you're going to be way, way behind the ability to perform on a project, especially to expectations of your senior management. So
Yeah,
understand those tools, learn them, become expert at those tools.
yeah, and especially no matter how good your analysis or whatever you learned at university, if it's hard to teach somebody new skills in a tool, you may have to default back to how the organization looks at it, because people are going to default back to their common way of doing things. It's just the nature of human behavior.
And that's not to say that once you understand the organization's preference, that you can't add your own nuance if you see some ability to improve even the data collection or analysis based on those tools. So don't be afraid once you understand to put your own nuance on those.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I think the other thing is, I just thought of this. I think you need to understand, it goes back to my very, very first story. You need to understand why you're doing this measurement and how and what it's being used for to disseminate information to your stakeholders and to your management. Because if you understand why, you'll know better how to collect the data for that analysis.
Right. And you'll have the energy and the focus and the drive to not just do the work, but to do the work well. This is where accountability comes in. is with enough sense of purpose, we invest that in there.
And this is where I also want to quote one of my former bosses when it comes to tools and you're not understanding how to use them or why. His favorite saying was, "A fool with a tool is still a fool." So the
That's right.
tool is not going to make you a better project manager, but understanding and utilizing the tool properly will make you a better project manager.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good.
Well,
Well,
good. I think
yeah,
measurements are behind us.
yeah, and not only that, it was as entertaining and valuable as I thought this would be. Now, we're coming up next week to our last domain, but I'd like to maybe have one or two shows after our last domain show and maybe do a wrap up across all the principles we've talked about and all the domains. And can we make sense of all this before we move on to our next season?
Yeah, no, that's very important. I think just be able to wrap up the whole season. And we've done a lot of work this year on principles, domains in the seventh edition of the PIM which I think has become a very valuable guide for project managers.
Yeah, and are taking time and investing effort to go into the details to be able to clearly talk about them. I've gained a lot of knowledge just by
Yes,
doing that.
absolutely. So next week we're going to be all about uncertainty. I'm uncertain as to what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I'm going to be ambiguous about
Yeah,
uncertainty. So yeah, that I think that'll be good. Um, and now, in the meantime, between now and then, is there any place we can reach out to you?
always on LinkedIn. Just
Okay.
find me, Merv Jersak on LinkedIn. Yes,
Bring all of your questions to us, whether it's on YouTube or LinkedIn, or if you talk to us locally or through the internet here. Please share, and we'll do the research. We'll find the answers if we don't already know it.
absolutely. So until next week.
Thanks again, Merv. It's a joy, and thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon.
All right, bye.